Tom Tugendhat, just very quickly from the foreign affairs point of view, do you understand Gordon Brown's anger on the vaccination question, and do you agree with him that this is a responsibility that should be in the laps of G7 leaders?
Of course I understand it, and most importantly, I think it's fundamentally in Britain's interest to make sure vaccinations are rolled out as quickly as possible around the world, for the very simple reason that we know about all these variants coming around the corner. You know, we've had a Kent variant, an Indian variant, and no doubt there'll be many other variants, on their way. And the faster we vaccinate, the fewer the variants, and the less likely there is of subsequent cross-infection in the UK. So this is simply self-interest, and that's why I think we should do it.
More important to get vaccines out to developing countries than to vaccinate children?
Well, I don't know. That's I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask scientists on that one, and it's not my area of expertise. So I'm talking to people about it at the moment. Actually, funnily enough.
All right. Well, let's turn to Afghanistan. You were plainly really deeply affected by what happened, and the fact that many of the people that you worked with in your 4 years, I think, in Afghanistan were left behind. How many people do you think remain who need to get out? The vaccines minister talked about low hundreds.
Well, I don't know, again, but I've certainly had contact with the best part of 100, and I don't suppose for a moment that I've had contact with the majority. So, it's very hard to say. And for everyone I've been in contact with, there's a family attached. So low hundreds strikes me as an optimistically low number.
Can you say anything about the efforts in which you've been involved? I read that you said you basically hadn't slept for weeks because of this, but you've been involved in efforts to bring people out.
Well, there's a collection of us who've been working in different ways to try and get folk out. And we've had, in earlier days, we had more success. We've had mixed success recently. But I mean, it's really a series of people, US, British, connecting individuals we know to safe houses we know and moving people around. It's extremely fraught, and it's getting harder as the Taliban and the various different groups that are affiliated with it get better, get more in place, get more structured. So, we're seeing, for example, that the biometric information that's been left behind is increasingly being used at checkpoints, and that has seen certainly at least one individual we know captured and sadly disappeared, and I'm told by others of several others.
There's a fundamental question about the way that our government has to behave, and that is, what does it think about the Taliban? Do you believe the Taliban when they say this is a new model, they're going to be different this time, for example, on the equality of women, and even if they are different in Kabul and Kandahar, can they enforce that change across the country?
Well, Trevor, this is the fundamental question. Who is the Taliban? I mean, I know who Mullah Baradar is, and I know that he negotiated in Doha and spent 2 years giving the US the runaround, conceding nothing and accepting everything. I know who Mullah Omar's son Yaqub is, and I know that he has very limited support in the Quetta Shura, but is used as a figurehead. I also know who Sirajuddin Haqqani is, who allied with Al-Qaeda for many years, introduced suicide bombing to Afghanistan, and now controls Kabul. And I know who many of the drug dealers and informal networks in the south are. After all, those are the people we faced in Helmand for so many years. But the idea that this is a single unit and that by negotiating with one group in Doha, you achieve a result in Kabul, I'm afraid is not really true. I mean, this is a very, very divided, clan-based, mob-based organization. Think of it more like the mafia than a government, and you'll have a better idea as to how it works.
Is there, therefore, any point in talking to the Taliban? What would you recommend? Should we be talking to the Taliban? And if so, which bit of it? You've identified at least 3 streams, and we know that there are many more, as well as the local warlords.
Well, the UK has always had a policy of reaching out in different ways to different groups. I have to say, I think formal talks with the Taliban are a somewhat bizarre idea, given that it doesn't have a formal structure. The fact that it still hasn't formed a government, what is it now, 2-3 weeks after it took Kabul, is partly an indicator of the divisions within the organization. It is fighting within itself as to what it does. So the idea that these talks are meaningful in a traditional sense, I'm afraid they're not. And the idea that the Taliban has changed again, it's got a much slicker PR outfit. I don't know who it's hired, but it's got a similar group to the people who are doing ISIS PR in northern Syria. But the reality that it's changed the way it treats women or murders minorities like the Hazara minority, it's complete rubbish. No, they're still as brutal and vicious as they were.
One very quick question, if I may ask. You interrogated the Foreign Secretary this week, and I think you rather embarrassed him by quoting from a document that he evidently didn't recognise as his own department's work. Did you come away from that encounter thinking that this was the best Foreign Secretary that the government could actually find in its ranks?
Look, I came away from that thinking that there are a lot of questions that the government needs to sort out. And the most important one today is one that's been summarised by General the Lord Richards in a piece, an article on Conservative Home website, which talks about having a unity of process. The one thing that really concerned me about that hearing, actually, there's a lot of backward-looking stuff in that hearing for very obvious reasons, because we need to understand what went wrong. The one thing that concerned me going forward was the fact that we do not have a single person, a single minister, a single official responsible for helping people who we owe duty of care to in Afghanistan and getting them out. Now, I'm delighted that Vicky Atkins is doing that in the UK. That's fantastic. But we need somebody doing the same thing in Afghanistan.
Honestly, I'm sorry to press you on this, Tom Tugendhat, but you don't think he's up to it, do you?
Well, look, Trevor, my job as the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee is to challenge whoever sits in that seat. So you're always going to see me being somewhat more aggressive towards the Foreign Secretary than towards any other minister. I mean, that's literally the job I've been asked to do by Parliament. So, I'm not going to get into this conversation for the simple reason that my job is to challenge, rather like your job is to challenge. If somebody asked you whether or not a minister was up to it or not up to it, you'd avoid the question, because your job is to challenge whoever the minister is. And so, that's what I've got to do.